apologize on the location of everything, so we've got some people in the wrong place. But we're gonna start.
I was one of those people, I didn't know where to go.
That is totally my bad. I did not catch somebody making a copy and paste, and, that was that, so. Welcome, everybody, to Arts and Conversations, and, those of you, which is everybody, but probably Eric and Jan, know me a little bit, and know that I have a huge love for Latin American art, Cuban in particular, and I could not be more pleased to introduce two of the stars of Cuba, actually. And Molly is going to be also kind of co-moderating with me today, because Molly was born in Cuba, and I met Molly in Rwanda hiking gorillas. And I said, when I was going to Cuba for the 14th Biennale, do you have family there? And she said, I do. And I said, well, what do they need? She said, everything. Band-Aids, aspirin, diapers, you name it. Anything you can put in a suitcase, would you do that? And by the way, would you make a money drop? Because I have family there. And I'll tell you, my whole interest in Cuba in the beginning was to really, Alicia Alonso was a Cuban prima ballerina who danced with the American Ballet Theater, and Castro liked two things, baseball and the ballet. And that's what I really wanted to do, is go see Alicia Alonso. But then I had to study the art and the artists before I went with the Art Institute in Chicago, and I was blown out of my mind, because I never thought of collecting art before. I mean, really seriously, until I went to Cuba. And to go to a country that has so little, and to create the most beautiful music, the most beautiful art, the most beautiful ballet companies, is beyond, I still don't understand it, and hopefully they're gonna explain a little bit about how that comes to be. Where do your creative juices come from? So, Sandra. I went to Sandra's home in Havana, and Sandra was not there. She still has a home in Cuba, and you have a printmaking facility there, and your family has been running it, but you're trying to get everybody out, or is everybody out of Cuba at this point?
No, they're still there. Trying to bring my sister and my niece.
Okay.
Hello.
Molly, you left Cuba, and what were the circumstances?
A long time ago, I was a little girl. It was 1963. When we left Cuba, I left with my mom, my brother and sister. My dad had left in 1961. He was very anti the revolution and was very outspoken. And my grandmother said to him, Nestor, you have to leave or you'll be arrested. So he left ahead, came to Miami, was processed at the Freedom Tower, and he was offered job opportunities. He thought Chicago would be the best place to find a job and raise a family. So we left in 63, he left in 61, we left in 63 and went through Mexico and waited in Mexico to get our visa to come to the United States. So unlike a lot of the Cubans that have come over, we really did not go to Miami. Chicago was our home. But now I'm in Miami. So, which I love.
And her family had to come through Mexico, so the aunt and the cousins that I met in Havana.
Right, so we have our last family members, we got them out, and they left a year ago and did the whole trekking to Nicaragua to the border, and they're here, and it's a family of 3 with a 10-year-old little boy, so, but all went well.
Alejandra, we're all 3 different generations.
Oh, myself, hi, Howard. I had opportunity to, as an artist, start doing some shows and art residencies in New York when I was 24. And so that was kind of my first relationship in the art world outside of Cuba, in New York. So I I started going to New York. I got a Rockefeller Foundation grant in 2015 to do some exhibitions there. And that was my first experience here in the US. And so I started spending more time in New York when I was 24, 25, going back to Havana, had my studio back there. That was the moment when Cuba was kind of finally opening to the world with the
So
Obama era. So we saw some kind of hope. So nobody knew if it was the moment to really leave or stay and kind of build something there. And then things got very bad after that. And I ended up completely moving to the US at the end of 2016, and I moved to LA. Then I moved back. I moved to Miami, so where I live right now for the last 4 years. So I had studios in Havana, I had a studio in New York, I had a studio in LA, I have a studio now in Miami. Just like it's been a round trip.
Do you still have all those studios?
No, only Miami. Only Miami.
And where are your shoes?
Only in Miami. So I moved to my studio 4 times in the last 9 years to different cities, to different
And
countries.
why did you pick Miami over New York or LA?
It was a circumstantial reason. During COVID, I was actually visiting Cuba at the very beginning of COVID. Came from New York to Havana, and COVID hits, and I got stuck there for 7 months. No flights in or out, so I had, you couldn't leave. So I stayed there painting and doing my things. And when I ran out of any art supply, money, food, everything I had stored, I started storing stuff. I said, I have to get out of here somehow. So I had to get out of Cuba again. Luckily, I found a friend of mine in Miami that was running an airline that goes to Cuba, and she phoned a humanitarian flight that I got on to Mexico. And I came to Miami. We went back with a couple of paintings inside to stay for 2-3 months, and then the idea was to move to LA. But I ended up staying in Miami. I had to do a show. I had an opportunity to do an exhibition, so I ended up renting a little studio, and then that studio grew, and I've been there for 4 years.
Is that the studio we went to visit?
Yeah, that's the
So
studio.
I should also, for those of you who don't know these artists, Sandra had 3 or 4 museum shows this past summer. Alejandro just came back from Zonamaco. He is represented by KDR in Miami. And he just got picked up by Pace. So he was honored in Zonamaco, and it's a very big trajectory, very big deal. NSU was one of the shows that you were in this past summer, which was really pretty extraordinary. So why do you think Latin American art is all of a sudden being shown?
I think it's kind of a debt with this kind of art that have been going on for so many years, and it's so important in this part of the world, and so many immigrants also, and people that came from all Latin America and established in United States for so long, in some way bring also the interest for this kind of art and the knowledge of this art. And it's I think in some way Latin American art is also very connected with problems and life experience that are very strong and that are important for all humankind in general, and that's why they are attracted also to for the American public. It's a kind of bringing a new experience, bringing a different point of view, and a lot of also craft and good work with materials on art and visual art in general. There's
Well, you're seeing, I mean, you can understand why Latin American art in this part of America, right? There's a huge Cuban diaspora down in Miami, but, Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago just had a huge show of Latin American art. You're seeing that all over the United States, and is it taking off in Europe in the same way? I'm seeing more in some museums.
You're right, I think, sorry, go for it.
Well, I was gonna mention, I had a gallery in Chicago in the 90s. And I started by representing Latin American artists and Cuban artists. And of course, the Cuban artists that I was representing were mostly Miami-based or from the diaspora. We, at that time, could not bring Cuban art into the United States. And in Chicago at the time, and Reagan, you might agree with me, it was hard. It took some teaching and introduction. The focus, at least for the Midwest, which is different than New York, the interest and the knowledge of Latin American art was just not a thing. And so it took some doing, but now, and we had great artists in Cuba prior to the revolution. We had Portocarrero, Wilfredo Lam, Amelia Pelaez. So they were there, but it was really not until the boom of, I think, the opening that more awareness happened on Cuban art. And I do agree with Sandra, it does show, you know, the struggles and everyday life. The colors could be so impactful. And, but I think it's coming around, and now you see Latin American art at all the auction houses. I mean, it's amazing the interest, and in Europe, I would
Yeah, I'm starting to see some in Europe. So, as Cubans, how do you find such joy and color and vibrancy in your work and in life when there is literally not food?
I think because as we didn't have anything, we had to invent it. You know, have it at least in imagination. Like the paintings I do, they talk about Cuba, they talk about the Caribbean. So this idea is very recurrent in my mind when I think about my work overall. Is how to the disaster of Cuba, which is beautiful too, because you still have beauty in Cuba. People are the same, but sociopolitically it's very bad. It's disastrous. But I always thought, how being an artist, how am I going to repair this for myself? I cannot live in Cuba, but here I'm still a foreigner. It's the foreigner situation. So how do I rebuild, at least for myself, an experience of my memories, my past, what Cuba was, what it could be, in my own memory, in my own imagination? Is through the colors, is through the lines, is through admiring the beauty that still exists in Cuba and Latin America in general. So I think that for me that's why I prefer to use beautiful color. I prefer to admire beauty instead of going into a radical position, which I completely understand too. But I just got tired of the gray, of the scarcity, all this kind of stuff. So if I didn't have an apple, I would just paint it.
You are not the first Cuban artist to tell me that. Some of the floral piece in the kitchen was the first piece I bought when I went down to Cuba, and I had said to him, "Why, to Alejandro? Am I pronouncing his name properly?"
My name?
Not you. No, the upstairs in the kitchen, the giant floral.
Oh, Adrian,
And he-
the
Adrian.
photographer.
Yes.
Adrian,
Mhm, Adrian Fernandez.
Fernandez.
Adrian.
Thank you. he said, and it's this giant floral piece, and he said, I make it up, and the background is the same as the floral piece of flowers. He said, because we have to imagine it. We don't have beautiful flowers here. These are plastic.
Yeah.
Which I found that amazing, the imagination, and you certainly see it in your ballet companies as well, and music, it's just the creativity is
Yeah.
beyond. And Alejandro, you had said upstairs, because I do have a lot of Cuban artists upstairs, you said, oh, I went to school with this one, I did this. And where are they now?
A lot of my friends are outside of Cuba. A lot of them are in Spain, in Mexico, here in the US. Most of them are in Europe, I think. Most of the artists.
In Spain, there's a lot of Cuban artists, a big diaspora now in Spain.
In Spain, in Madrid.
In Miami.
But you went to Cuba now, and you find a young artist that is going to the San Alejandro Gallery, 16, 17 years old, already creating a body of work.
Isn't that
You go back in 3 years and he's an artist, already there, a new artist.
And I think because art is the only space of freedom that we have in Cuba. It's the main space to creativity and to express your concerns, desires, hopes, whatever. That's why I think it's so important, music as a way of expression for people kind of forgetting their sorrows. And dance is super important, and visual art, of course. And visual art in Cuba have been a very important place also to establish a discourse that is different from the official discourse, that is talking about different things. You have a concept and a narrative that differ from the official history that is related to how Cuban revolution in some way failed in many ways failed to the people.
So that's a perfect segue, because this is your pioneer girl
Yeah.
in Sandra's work, and explain the indoctrination of this figure. In most of your work, she is represented.
Yeah, it was a character that I created in 1993 when I was studying at the Higher Institute of Art in Havana. And so at that time was just before Russia fall, was what we call the special period. It was a very hard time in Cuba, a very deep economic crisis, almost like now. I think these have been the worst moments in Cuba is now, and what happened in 91 after.
So this is when Russia backed out
Uh-huh.
of financing everything in Cuba.
Yeah, and then I think it was a good moment for art. This crisis made that many young artists questioning about what was happening in the country, want to in some way change what was happening, and I think in my generation thought that Cuba was going through the same transformation that happened in Russia and all ex-socialist countries. And I created the character of the pioneer girl, that it was a mix between my self-portrait when I was 10 and a little old print. And then she was kind of an alter ego of my generation. The people born after the revolution in Cuba, we all wear the same uniform, the red uniform that in some way uniformate all Cubans under one education that is a kind of adoctrination that made you believe that you live in the best of the country and that what's happening there was how it should be.
That you don't have food.
And people was
water.
isolated, was impossible to travel outside at that moment in the 90s. She was kind of a narrator in my world of all this. At the same time, was a kind of a very idealistic character, a kind of utopian character, because I think that to that moment, the education in Cuba, even with adoctrination, has some part that was good, like this educational system. For instance, in art was very good. We have great school for ballet, great school for art and for music, sports also. But at the same time, I always think, and it's part of my thesis with my work, is they educate you, but they don't want that you think with your own head. And that you think differently that the one that the official discourse established. And that's why this character in some way, for me, was a narrator of all these circumstances that was suffering the same for all Cubans born during this time.
So I remember Jan Capote was somebody I nominated for the Museum of Contemporary Art in our Merge collection. And they were having such difficulty getting Cuban art out of Cuba. And if it had any political leaning, I was told it wasn't allowed to leave. So Alejandro, you left with paintings, though yours are not political. Is that how you were able to leave with your art?
I think my work is very political.
But not overtly.
No, not not directly, you know, but just thinking and having a decision on what to do could be very political too. But as it didn't have a direct message or image, of course, didn't have any problem. But I grew up in Cuba and started getting into art school, seeing Sandra's work. She graduated in 1993. I was 3 years old.
Yeah,
Actually,
sadly.
a woman's age.
So she was someone I looked up when I was studying. You know, so she was showing all over Havana internationally. So this one was kind of something we studied in school. And but we are from very different generations too. Your generation was, I think, more politically active than mine.
Because was different times also.
Yeah.
My generation developed more during the special period. Then it came a time of certain stability and calm, where it wasn't so profound.
And now
the
it's
crisis,
getting
and now
hot
it's
again,
getting
getting hot again,
worse.
politically in Cuba. There are a lot of activists, a lot of artists who are in jail, my generation. I know them so bad.
And how are they gonna get out? I mean, these young
We don't
artists
know.
coming through, first of all, how are they getting the money? I know, when you were buying art in Cuba, you had to mail money to Spain or into Miami, and Daleen Rodriguez, that was the artist.
Oh, the one upstairs
Yeah,
in the.
Broken Dreams.
with the broken-
And Daleen was such a new artist that, she didn't have bank accounts in another country. So I had to hand deliver to someone in San Francisco who was going over to change the currency, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, she didn't even have money for a box to send me the piece.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the creativity of the Cubans. We always need to deal with so many things that are not part of creating art, are part of how you live, how you, because it's kind of a play, no, where you are always playing the mouse and the cat. It's like,
You just have to find your way in the chaos. It's very chaotic too. It's controlled but very chaotic.
So did you have any trouble getting out? You might have said this, I came in a little late. Did you have any trouble getting out the first time? Or was that
Not
a
really,
legitimate
no.
question?
That's and
That
all
was-
questions are legit.
For me, that was a
It's an
moment
age.
I started getting out of Cuba to New York. In the moment it was really opening up. So Cuban artists traveling to New York was normal, suddenly. So we were able to go to New York and come back. Actually, I think the only thing you can sell under the embargo laws in the US is Cuban art. Made in Cuba,
Yeah.
something made in Cuba, nothing else, only Cuban art. So there are dealers who are able to sell Cuban art in the US legally. You cannot sell a cigar, Cuban cigar, or a bottle of perfume made in Cuba, but you can sell art. So that kind of started having a lot of art dealers and people who were connected in the art. New York, Miami, going back and forth, getting artists from Havana showing them in New York, and so I kind of felt in that moment. So for me, it was easy, but
I
for
think-
Sandra at the beginning, I don't know how you did it.
No, at the
Did you ever
beginning it
listen
was
to
hard, but I started to work with a gallery in Mexico,
Yeah.
and then through that.
Through that.
I think some of the artists too, from what I remember prior to the opening, had to be sponsored by a university
Yeah.
or an institution. Once the opening
Oh, yeah.
started and the
Yeah, it
boom
was
happened, where people
easier.
can go and meet the artists, and the art was the one thing that could circumvent the embargo.
Yeah. It was a great opportunity for Cuban artists to really show their work out of Cuba, which Cuban artists didn't really have a market at all. Still today, it's very difficult to really have a market of Cuban artists. And we have such great artists from Cuba, and very little are there, but you know, I think like 20 years ago, you were able to get away from for nothing.
Yeah.
Well, and
Oh,
museum
today you
groups
cannot.
were going, I mean, that's how I went in, I don't know how the museums decided they were able to get in, because we weren't humanitarian, we were clearly out shopping.
It's educational.
Oh, was
Right,
that,
yeah,
yes,
for
that-
education,
yeah,
yeah.
so that worked, so, and
Yeah.
then, that's how we went to Sandra's
Mhm.
home.
Yeah.
That was part of the experience, that
Yeah.
museums had a list of galleries and a list of homes, and many of the galleries are their homes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that start during Clinton. It was like kind of an opening. It's always happening like in wave, no? Because during Clinton, I remember there was a little opening that people could go there in groups from museum. Then it was completely closed. I remember I had a show in Washington in 2002, I think. Was during Bush time and was just before the towers. And that
Oh.
was impossible to get a visa to come to the United States. Cuba was on the list of terrorist countries too.
Mhm.
So even artists, everything was closed.
Did
And
you have US representation? You had Mexican representation, but
Yeah.
did you have a US gallery?
Now,
No,
at that time,
At that
yes,
time.
I worked with a gallery in Washington.
so you already had
Yeah.
representation.
Mhm.
Alejandro, what about you? Did you have representation
You're
before
still
you came
young.
here?
Yeah.
Not really. I did a show. I was part of a art collective with 2 other artists. So we did a lot of Cuban artists did a show at the Robert Miller Gallery in New York in 2015.
Yeah.
And I think that was the last show of the gallery. Then they closed it. With Cuban artists, it was insane. But I didn't have a U.S. representation. I came and I got a visa to come to the U.S. because of the Rockefeller Foundation, a grant that they gave me, and we kind of worked on that grant for 2 years on that project. So we had the opportunity to go to New York and stay there for months and discover, go to museums. That's how I got a visa. Because I remember I was invited to a group show like a year before that, and it wasn't enough to get a visa. So that visa got denied. Then I got a visa after, 1 year after, with the Rockefeller Foundation invitation letter and sponsoring me. That's how.
So are you able to, and this, I'm gonna open it up to everybody else, are you able to sponsor now other artists to come in?
I think you are able to sponsor anybody.
Mhm. Yeah,
So you can.
but it's hard to get a visa. Now it's super hard.
It takes forever.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there's that influx into like
Mhm.
Spain and Mexico,
Mhm.
because it's a little bit harder to come here.
Yeah, Spain
You
because.
can sponsor and ask, but it could take years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Spain because Cubans, a lot of the Cubans came from
From
Spain,
Spain, right.
Mhm.
so they can get a Spanish passport. That's why a lot of them go to Spain.
There was a cartoon, which I don't know if I would call it a cartoon, but it was a small drawing, and it had the Havana airport, and people just had like a small backpack, and the airport was full, And it was the exodus
Hmm.
that, you know, they were leaving, not going back. They were not going out, you know, on a holiday trip. They just took what they could and were
Yeah.
leaving, and yeah. But I think it's a little bit harder to come here. The visa situation is a little bit harder here.
Well, I know what you went through for your family.
So-
My last question for you both, where do you see your career in 5 years, Alejandro?
I don't even know.
Cause you've been on a rocket ship.
I have been on a rocket ship, yeah.
Literally.
It's been, last year was great, it's insane, I didn't know this was going to happen to me.
Well,
Somehow, something was going to happen, we didn't know that way.
So Allison, who I just texted that she was, last minute was not able to come, Allison Roddick, who ran Pace Gallery, put Alejandro in a group show, and I met Alejandro sitting in the bench in the gallery, and I didn't know who you were, and I pointed up to this small painting at the very top of the ceiling, and I said, that's the one I really would love to have. He said, that's mine!
Yeah.
It's sold. But that's mine. I said, well, I would love to come see your studio, which I did. A small group of us came down to see Alejandro's studio. And he was working on a piece almost the size of that entire wall. Is that an exaggeration?
I know it was, yeah.
Or bigger?
Yeah.
So at the NSU, which is the Fort Lauderdale Museum, he was creating a piece for the museum, and the museum bought that piece.
Yeah, the bar.
Anyway,
And I
he
think
literally.
you mentioned the Rubel in Miami.
Yeah, I did the Rubel residency in the Rubel Museum in Miami. So if you go to Miami, you can see the works.
It's incredible.
They're there for the whole year. Yeah, last year I did 5 solo shows in different places around the world.
Yeah, you literally got on a rocket and just.
I was smashed.
Yeah. So.
But very lucky and very fortunate to be able to do that. You know,
Is this your painting?
this is my painting. This one was at the NSU Art Museum. We had 5 paintings there, and I kept this one for myself because it comes from a poem by Jose Marti, Cuban poet, writer, philosopher from the 1800s, and it has a poem that says
Cuba de noche.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's
Beautiful.
It translates to like 2 homelands I have, Cuba and night, and the night. So I got the phrase, a small stanza from the poem, I extracted it, I really loved it, and got the inspiration to make this painting. So, you know, this idea of having 2 homelands, the night and Cuba, it happens to me too. I dream at night, I have a lot of ideas at night. So we Cubans kind of live in that double reality of really not being able to go back, living in the Cuba we have in our minds, imagining, you know, Cuba 60 years ago is not there anymore. That doesn't exist. The Cuba was born in the 90s. It doesn't exist. It's completely different.
Well, and if I could speak for myself, I'm not an artist, but I grew up with art. My dad was a big collector, and he always talked about visiting artist studios in Havana, and it just was, we were all so fond of the stories. And I left in 1963, and I've gone back, and Cuba is very much a part of me. There's just, and I think that's the draw to Miami. You know, it's a little bit of, you find your culture and people you can relate to. We were talking about where your home was in Playa, and I said, oh, I was on 8th between 1st and 3rd, and you said, was it you or was it?
I was my cousin.
It was your cousin, and we're comparing where we lived, and that was from way back. But, you know, I did have my family that stayed there. Now, of course, everybody has lost so much, and now they're here, but, you know, hopefully opportunity and a better life.
But you've created that. I mean, Molly and I are dear friends, and you've created that for your family. You
Yes.
gave them the springboard and reparations, you know, sending money back, with keeping people
Yeah.
afloat. and you've allowed them to have a base to
Yes,
come
I
to.
mean, it's sad because there's people that don't have the relatives or relatives with the means to pay for this journey. And, you know, and of course you do all the paperwork with the government and you are their sponsors. So we are responsible for them. And, you know, not everybody has that.
Sandra, before I open it up, you have to answer, where do you see your career in 5 years?
Well, I don't know neither, because who knows who will happen tomorrow. But I think I always feel very lucky with being an artist. We have the opportunity of creating. I have been living from what I love for more than 30 years, and for me that's more than enough. And recently I have had good exhibition. Last year was a very good year for me, and I had a show at Rockefeller Center for Latin American Art in Harvard, a solo show. I had a solo show at Lower Art Museum in Miami, and I participated in a beautiful exhibition in Marlboro Gallery of Latin American Art in Madrid, Marlboro in Madrid. And I have plans for this year also with several exhibitions, and as is I could have my hands on my head and continue to work what I love, that for me is more than enough.
Well, it's,
And I have a wonderful family also, that's super important.
And then Alejandro.
Yeah, Alejandro and my daughter and my family that still are in Cuba.
So I'm gonna open it up to all of you for any questions. Hi.
I have a question. Cuba is such a confluence of cultures. There's so many distinctive cultures, and Latin American literature is rich in imagery. How do you derive your influence when you have a multitude of things to choose from?
Yeah, I study all of that all the time, and Alejo Carpentier, a Cuban writer from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, etc., all the way to the 70s, he said that the Caribbean, it goes beyond Cuba. You have the Caribbean, and then you have Cuba, the island nations around. Was the new Mediterranean for the Americans. It's a huge melting pot of cultures that came from Europe, from Africa, the indigenous, the Taínos that were already in the islands, and then from there it went to the Americas. From these little islands in the Caribbean, they went to Mexico, they went to Portugal, to Brazil, etc., etc. So Cuba, when we talk about Cuba, it's not the Cuba we were born in. It's the Cuba that has been there for 500 years since Europe came into the picture. So there's a lot of inspiration, there's a lot of different waters you can drink by being Cuban being born there, or third generation, second generation. So, there is so much to be said about that. Those little islands have so much history, information, poetry. The beauty of those islands goes beyond our thinking, our social, cultural realm. You go to the countryside of Cuba and you see the beauty is there, pure, still is.
Yeah, I think we are the son of like syncretism. We live in a country that was kind of in the center. I think it was like the navel of the world, because it's like in the center of the Caribbean Sea, and was a very important island for many years, a place where everybody passed by, and it had the influence of so many different cultures and times in history. And for me, all that is a sort of inspiration, and of course we have a lot of influence from Africa and African culture, Cuban, American, Cuban Afro-Cuban religion and also Chinese culture, Spanish, of course, is one of the main. And I think that's also why I think there are it's so rich art in Cuba. We have so wonderful poets in all 19th century. Martí is one of them. We have wonderful musicians, and all this is it's kind of, you are part of this line of people creating in this island that it have a lot of contradiction, it have a lot of bad things happening, but at the same time it have all this creativity in all spheres of the life, not only in art, and people to live, the people needs to create everything from the doorknob to whatever, to the earrings to whatever, and that's is I think what Cubans should be proud of, and as well we need not to be proud of, because we don't know how to have a democracy or have to keep our freedom.
Who was the, oh my God, this was about 15 years ago, she won a Nobel Prize, and she lived in a high-rise in.
Oh, that's Yoni Sanchez?
Yes.
Yes.
And she couldn't, the elevator stopped working, and that they took apart toaster parts and car parts to get the elevator to work, and obviously she could not receive her Nobel Prize in person. She was not allowed out. But interestingly, Alicia Alonso was allowed out of Cuba by Castro, not Raul, but Fidel, he was still in power at that point, to go dance on
She
the honor
danced at the Kennedy Center.
and American Ballet Theater being honored.
And
for
we
the-
saw her in Chicago.
Oh, you
Oh,
did?
well, she was there in Chicago, she didn't dance.
I was gonna say, wow. And she
No.
was blind, by the way, I might add, this dancer. And she danced on a rake stage, which is like this. And they had lights in the bottom to reflect, so she could tell depth, so she wouldn't fall off the stage. And she was one of the most extraordinary. Did you ever get to see her?
Yeah, of course. Since I was a kid, I go to the theater I used to go to the theater with my parents to watch ballet. Ballet was very important in Cuba when I was a child.
It still is.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah,
I was
still,
a
but-
child, I took
Yeah.
ballet and Spanish dance. And when we had the Kennedy Center, the Cuban festival that you were at.
Right.
So we had a lot of artists, and the Cuban ballet came, and Alicia Alonso came. And I had a chance to meet her, so I will show you a picture.
Okay, because I never did see her. I had to pay big bribes to get into the school, and the company was not in session, but the flamingo dancers were there. And apparently my bribe was not enough, because they chased me out after 3 pictures. Apparently that was it, and out I went on my arse. But anybody else have any questions? No questions?
What was the art gallery in Washington that you're associated with?
Alida Anderson was the name. At that time, this gallery closed many years ago. It was from 1998 to 2005.
And who represents you now?
In Miami,
Yeah.
Pan American Art Projects.
Which is another, and if anyone is interested, on the 19th, right, that right, Sunday? No, 18th. Miami is having a brunch art walk. So there's all these lists of galleries, anyone wants it, I'll send it to you, that, like 7 or 8 galleries are gonna be participating in it. And there's a lot of new, really incredible galleries in Miami that I just found. Going to drool at your show at KDR.
It's not my show.
No, it's
anymore.
not anymore.
Anna Wong.
Right, no,
Okay.
not right now, but this was a couple weeks ago, and I
Yes.
went down, I'm like,
Yeah,
oh my
they do
gosh,
the-
Mindy Solomon was the only one there, and now there's
Yes,
4
they do
galleries.
it on Sundays. Yeah.
So anyway, if
They haven't
anyone's
done my show
interested.
yet.
It's March 18th?
No, next Sunday.
Oh. This
President's
Sunday.
Weekend, this coming
This
Sunday.
coming Sunday.
This coming, thank you.
I have a question about community and artist community. I am wondering, have you felt like you've been able to find strength through Cubans who are actually born in the United States? Like, do you feel a relationship with that group, or are you closer with those who are actually born on the island?
No, absolutely, yes. Yeah, because the Cuban culture it goes throughout many hundreds of years. So it doesn't matter. We are Spaniards, we are Africans, we are Tainos. So it's a whole mix of people that were born in an island, and then we had people who left Cuba in the 1800s to go back to Spain, or to go to Mexico, to go to the US. You have Cubans that went in the 1800s during the wave of reconcentration they went to Key West in the 1800s, and when you go to Key West, you have generations of Cubans been there for 150 years. So here in Miami, yeah, I have family who came here in the 60s, and they are second, third generation today. I find them Cubans as well, same thing. Because we are a country that we're people that were born in the island. The island is a place of connection, but we came from all over the world. Cubans.
I think that yes, that you can say that yes, when you see, for instance, that the Perez Art Museum, that is one of the main museums in Miami, created by Jorge Perez, who was born in Cuba, then or I think born in Argentina, but the mother was Cuban, something like that. And he was so interested on collecting Cuban art from inside and from outside the island. So there are so many people like him in different like you, like you. Well, you're not Cuban,
I'm
but
Irish.
almost.
Cuban wanna be.
And that I have been kind of little by little supporting Cuban art inside and outside of Cuba. And I think that's something that said a lot about this spirit of still people that even when they're born here or they have been here for so many years, they still are connected with the island and with the idea of being Cuban. And at the same time, I think there are also a big population that don't know exactly what is happening or don't have access to art in general. I am teaching at FIU art in the art department, and I have so many Cuban descent students that I love because they are so curious about, but sometimes you see that they are kind of disconnected of what is happening. So it needs maybe to have more concentration, I don't know, or maybe more promotion of what is happening in arts to be accessible for all the Cuban population that is in Miami, that is really big.
Anyone else have any questions? All right, please have some wine, some water. Anybody that's going to be going to the restaurant for dinner, if you want to leave your cars here, we can go on a party bus and come back on the party bus to pick up your cars. And that's it. More than one was. He wants to be on the party bus.
No complaints. No one